Hey guys, I've been a long time lurker on this sub, but after what I've been through, I feel like I need to share my story. My name's Alex, and I live in Massachusetts. I thought my marriage to my wife Hannah was solid. Sure, we had our share of arguments and challenges like any couple, but I never imagined things would take the turn they did. It all started on a random Wednesday evening. I was sitting on the couch, half watching the evening news on my phone while scrolling through Reddit. Out of nowhere, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something made me pick up. Hello? I said, expecting a telemarketer or spam. Alex, it's Madeleine, a familiar voice replied. My stomach did a little flip. Madeleine was my ex-girlfriend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Our breakup wasn't messy, but we'd both moved on and hadn't kept in touch. Hi, I said, unsure where this was going. What's up? Why are you calling me? She hesitated for a moment before speaking. Her voice was calm but serious. Look, I know this is out of the blue, but I need to tell you something. I saw your wife with another man last week. I'm sorry to intrude, but I thought you should know. I froze. My first reaction was disbelief. Was this some kind of sick joke? Why would Madeline, of all people, call me with something like this? What exactly did you see? I asked. They were at a cafe in Cambridge, she said. They were holding hands and laughing. It was intimate. I didn't want to assume, but it didn't look like a business meeting. I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but I couldn't just ignore it. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning. Was Madeleine making this up to stir the pot, or could she be telling the truth? I'd never known her to be malicious, but people change. Well, at the same time, Hannah's recent behavior hadn't been typical. Constant evening meetings, sudden work trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. It was enough to plant a seed of doubt. Thanks for letting me know, I finally said. My voice clipped. I'll figure it out. Madeleine apologized again for the intrusion and hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it all. I wanted to believe she was lying, that there was some other explanation, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That phone call was the first crack in the facade of my marriage. Little did I know, it was just the beginning. After Madeleine's call, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my gut. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as some kind of mistake or even a twisted attempt to stir up drama. After all, why would she call out of the blue after all these years? But the more I thought about it, the more her words echoed in my head. It didn't look like a business meeting. That night, as I sat across from Hannah at the dinner table, I couldn't help but notice little things that I might have ignored before. She seemed distracted, scrolling through her phone while picking at her food. When I asked her about her day, her answers were vague, the usual meetings, busy as always. It was nothing new. Hannah had always been a go-getter, the kind of person who thrived on being busy and important. She loved talking about how indispensable she was at work, how her colleagues couldn't survive without her. But now her self-importance felt sharper, more like a shield to deflect any real connection between us. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. What if Hannah really was just working hard, like she always had? I hated the idea of being paranoid, of doubting my wife without proof, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong. I decided to keep my thoughts to myself, at least for now. Bringing it up without any evidence would only lead to a fight, and if I was wrong, it could damage our marriage. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Madeleine's call had opened my eyes to something I'd been trying to ignore. My trust in Hannah was starting to crack, and I wasn't sure how to repair it. After sitting with my doubts for a few days, I decided I couldn't just let things lie. If there was even a chance that Madeleine was right, I needed to know for sure. But I didn't want to confront Hannah without something concrete. I'd look like a paranoid fool if I was wrong. So, I started quietly watching her behavior. Hannah's schedule had always been predictable. She worked in a high-pressure sales role, which meant her days were packed with client meetings and calls. Lately, though, she'd been taking more evening meetings, sometimes claiming they were last-minute requests from important clients. At first, I bought it. Her job was demanding. But now, after Madeleine's call, those meetings felt suspicious. One night, when Hannah said she'd be working late, I decided to drive by her office. I parked across the street and waited, feeling a little ridiculous. The building lights were on, but her car wasn't in the lot. Instead, she was parked in a different area of the city, a spot she'd never mentioned before. My heart sank as I realized she might not even be at work. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I ordered a GPS tracker online. It felt extreme, but my gut told me there was more to this story and I couldn't keep sitting in the dark. When it arrived, I installed it on her car late one night while she was asleep. I also found a call recording app and put it on her phone when she left it unattended. I hated the idea of spying on my wife, but the growing doubt in my mind wouldn't let me rest. For the next week, I kept track of Hannah's movements. Most days, her schedule lined up with what she told me: meetings, errands, and trips to the gym. But twice, the GPS tracker showed her car parked at the same apartment complex downtown. She'd never mentioned the place before, and it didn't fit with any of the client addresses I knew about. Most of our conversations were normal, work, or with friends, but one call stood out. She'd answered with a soft, almost flirty tone I hadn't heard in years. The man's voice on the other end was unfamiliar, and their conversation was short but intimate. My stomach churned as I listened to her laugh in a way she hadn't around me in months. By the end of the week, I had enough to confirm that something wasn't right. The apartment visits, the flirty phone call, it all painted a picture I didn't want to see. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more than breadcrumbs. I needed undeniable proof. As much as it hurt, I decided to keep watching, hoping to catch her in the act if she was truly betraying me. The decision to keep monitoring Hannah wasn't easy, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. If I confronted her without solid proof, she'd just deny everything and flip the narrative, turning it into an argument about how I didn't trust her. So I doubled down on gathering evidence. Over the next few weeks, the GPS tracker and call recording app became my lifelines. Each day I'd check her car's movements, looking for patterns, and sure enough, those apartment visits continued. She'd go there after work, staying for a few hours before heading home. Sometimes it was once a week, other times twice, but it was always the same address. The calls confirmed what I feared most. She talked to the same man, Brian, several times a week. Their conversations weren't just friendly, they were intimate. I'd hear snippets like, "I can't wait to see you tonight," or "Last time was amazing." Hearing her say those words in a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in years was like a knife to the gut. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't just a harmless friendship, it was an affair. I started keeping a file of everything I found. Screenshots of her call logs, GPS locations, recordings of her phone calls. I saved it all. It felt cold and calculated, but I knew I needed undeniable proof if I wanted to confront her and come out of it with the truth on my side. One night, I followed her. She'd told me she had a late meeting, but the GPS tracker showed her heading downtown to that same apartment complex. I parked a block away and waited. About an hour later, I saw her walking out with Brian. They didn't even try to hide it. He put his arm around her as they laughed and walked toward her car. My heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice, but I stayed calm, snapping a few pictures from my car. I now had everything I needed: the GPS data, the call recordings, and even photos. It was all there, laid out like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but one thing was clear: Hannah couldn't lie her way out of this anymore. By the time I decided to escalate things further, I was already convinced of the truth. The GPS tracker, call recordings, and my own observations were enough to paint a damning picture. But I knew Hannah, and I knew she'd deny everything unless the evidence was so undeniable that there was no way out. That's when I brought in my friend Tyler. Tyler is a professional photographer, someone I trusted implicitly. I explained the situation to him, how I suspected Hannah of having an affair and how I needed solid proof. He agreed to help without hesitation. We planned to catch her the next time she visited Brian's apartment. A few days later, the opportunity came. Hannah told me she had a client dinner that evening, the same excuse she'd used countless times before. The GPS tracker confirmed what I already suspected. She wasn't headed to any restaurant, she was going to Brian's apartment. Brian got out of his car. The GPS tracker now describes Brian's production crew tidying up the crew. Joe Tucker K. Rambo. Tyler and I parked near the complex, staying out of sight but within range for him to capture clear photos. It didn't take long. Just as the GPS had indicated, Hannah's car pulled up to the building. She stepped out, dressed to the nines, looking like she was headed to a high-end event. Brian met her at the entrance, and they embraced. Tyler's camera clicked rapidly, capturing every detail. Then, as if to seal the deal, they kissed before heading inside together. Tyler's photos were crystal clear. There was no mistaking the intimacy between them. At the time, I felt a mix of emotions watching it all unfold. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew. The worst part wasn't suspecting anymore. It was knowing the truth and having the proof to back it up. When Tyler handed me the camera later that evening, I scrolled through the photos, my stomach churning with each one. There was no ambiguity here, no room for explanations or excuses. This was the smoking gun I needed. That night, I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at the folder of evidence I'd collected. I had everything: the GPS data, the call recordings, and now these damning photos. The time for observation was over. It was time to confront Hannah and put an end to this charade. After getting the photos, I knew I had enough evidence to confront Hannah, but before I did, I wanted to rattle her lover, Brian, and see how he'd react. I figured if I could put him on edge, he might slip up or even back off entirely. So I decided to send him an anonymous message. Using a burner email account, I crafted a short but pointed message. I know about your relationship with Hannah. If you don't stop seeing her, everyone will know the truth. I hit send and waited. It didn't take long for him to respond. Less than an hour later, I got an email back. Who is this? What do you want? I didn't answer. Instead, I sent another short message. This is your one and only warning. Walk away or I'll make sure her husband and everyone else sees the evidence. Brian replied almost immediately, look, I don't know what you think you know, but this is none of your business. Leave us alone. It was clear he was nervous. His defensiveness practically jumped off the screen. I could imagine him pacing back and forth, wondering who I was and how much I really knew. I let him sweat it out, ignoring his follow-up emails. The next few days were quiet. Hannah seemed as cheerful and oblivious as ever, but I noticed a change in her phone habits. She seemed to be texting less frequently, and when she did, she was more cautious, glancing at me before picking up her phone. I could tell something had shifted, and it wasn't hard to guess why. Brian, on the other hand, wasn't as quiet. He sent a few more emails, ranging from defensive to pleading. One even said, please, let's talk. I need to know who you are. It was almost laughable. Did he think I was going to sit down and have a chat with him about how he was sleeping with my wife? I never responded to his messages. He laughed and wrote me a text to say, Brian, no matter what, don't talk to me like that. I'm referring to you by name and the pronouns. The goal wasn't to engage with him. It was to make him nervous, to plant doubt and paranoia in his mind. If I could disrupt their little world before confronting Hannah, it would give me the upper hand. And judging by Brian's frantic replies, it was working. By now, I had plenty of evidence to confront Hannah, but I wanted to leave no room for her to wiggle out of it. The photos, the GPS data, the call recordings, it was all solid. Still, I needed one final nail in the coffin. I wanted irrefutable proof that she couldn't deny, and that meant catching her on video. I planned carefully. The next time she claimed to be going out for a meeting, I tracked her with the GPS and confirmed she was headed to Brian's apartment. This time, I brought a small hidden camera and set it up near the apartment entrance. The entrance wasn't gated and there were no cameras nearby, so it wasn't difficult to place it discreetly. I positioned it to capture a clear view of anyone coming and going. The wait was nerve-wracking. I parked my car a block away, watching the live feed on my phone. About 20 minutes later, her car pulled up. Hannah stepped out, dressed as if she were attending a fancy dinner, and walked toward the apartment building. Brian was already at the door, waiting for her. They hugged and kissed, just like in the photos, before heading inside together. I let the camera record for a few hours, ensuring I captured her arrival and eventual departure. When she finally left, Brian walked her to her car, holding her hand like they were a happy couple. It was all there, the intimacy, the familiarity, the blatant disregard for her marriage. Watching it unfold in real time made my blood boil, but it also gave me a strange sense of closure. I'd seen enough. When I got home, I reviewed the footage to ensure everything was clear. It was. Every moment I needed to prove her betrayal was there, time-stamped and undeniable. The final piece of the puzzle was in place. That evening, I sat down at my desk and prepared a flash drive with all the evidence I'd collected. The GPS data, the call recordings, the photos, and now the video. I organized everything neatly into folders, labeling each one with dates and details. I wanted there to be no question about what had happened and when. With the flash drive in hand, I was ready. The time for observation was over. Tomorrow, I would confront Hannah, and this time she wouldn't be able to deny a thing. The next evening, I decided it was time to confront Hannah. I waited until after dinner, letting her settle in and drop her guard. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Hannah, can we talk? I said, my tone calm but serious. She looked up, a bit startled by my tone. Of course. What's up? She asked, setting her phone down. I walked over and placed the flash drive on the coffee table in front of her. Before you answer that, I want you to watch something. Her eyes flicked to the flash drive, then back to me. I could see the unease starting to creep in. What is this? She asked, trying to sound casual. Proof, I said simply. Proof of what you've been doing behind my back. Her face paled. Michael, I don't know what you think you found, but... I cut her off. Save it, Hannah. I know about Brian. The calls, the apartment, the dinners. I know everything. Her mouth opened, then closed again as she struggled to come up with something to say. I took the flash drive and plugged it into the laptop on the coffee table. Let me make it easier for you, I said, opening the first folder. I started with the photos, images of her and Brian outside his apartment, embracing and kissing. Her face went from pale to crimson as the slideshow played out in front of her. I can explain, she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, we're not done yet, I said, moving on to the video. I played the footage of her arriving at Brian's apartment, the kiss, and their hand-holding as they walked inside. Her tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands. Anna, I said coldly, do you have anything to say for yourself? She sobbed into her hands, muttering apologies that felt hollow. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she choked out. That's not an answer, I replied, my voice steady. You've not only destroyed our marriage, but any trust I ever had in you, and now you're going to face the consequences. She dropped to her knees, begging me to forgive her, promising it would never happen again, but her words rang hollow. I'd already made up my mind. I'm filing for divorce, I said firmly. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and this evidence ensures there's nothing you can do to change that. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. The love I'd once felt for her was buried under the weight of her lies. I stood up, leaving her on the floor, and walked out of the room. That night, I stayed at a friend's house. I couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof as her, not after everything I'd uncovered. As I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This chapter of my life was over, but at least I could move forward knowing the truth. The days following the confrontation were a blur. I contacted my lawyer the very next morning and filed for divorce. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be taking such a definitive step after years of being married to someone I once trusted with everything. But there was no hesitation in my mind. Hannah had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into staying. Hannah tried everything to stop me. She cried, begged, and even tried to guilt me. Think about everything we've built together, she said during one of her tearful pleas. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. But her words only made me angrier. You already destroyed everything we built, I told her. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. My lawyer assured me that the evidence I'd gathered would make the divorce process straightforward. In Massachusetts, infidelity can play a significant role in divorce proceedings, especially when it comes to dividing assets or determining spousal support. The photos, videos, and call logs left no room for doubt, and Hannah's attempts to argue otherwise fell flat. The court process was quicker than I expected, thanks to the overwhelming evidence. Within weeks, the divorce was finalized. I kept the house as it had been purchased in my name before we married, and Hannah left with little more than her personal belongings. It wasn't about revenge, it was about fairness. She'd made her choices, and she had to face the consequences. As for Brian, their relationship didn't survive the fallout. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he ghosted her shortly after I filed for divorce. Maybe he couldn't handle the pressure, maybe he realized she wasn't worth the trouble. Either way, it was poetic justice. The person she'd risked everything for had abandoned her when she needed him most. Hannah's reputation also took. Word got out about what she'd done, and many of our mutual friends sided with me. It wasn't something I actively encouraged, but the truth has a way of spreading. She'd built her life on appearances, and now those appearances were shattered. Once the dust settled, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The anger and sadness I'd carried for weeks began to fade, replaced by a sense of closure. The marriage was over, but so was the pain of living with someone I couldn't trust. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Now it was time to move forward, to rebuild my life and figure out who I was without Hannah. It wouldn't be easy, but at least I was free to start over on my own terms. It's been a few months since the divorce was finalized, and I've had a lot of time to reflect on everything that happened. If you had told me a year ago that my marriage would end like this, I would have laughed in disbelief. Hannah and I had what I thought was a strong relationship, built on trust and love, or at least that's what I convinced myself to believe. Looking back, I can't help but wonder how I missed the signs for so long. Were there red flags earlier that I ignored? Maybe. But it's easy to blame yourself when you're picking up the pieces. The truth is, Hannah's betrayal wasn't about me. It was about her choices, her flaws, and her inability to appreciate what we had. One thing I keep coming back to is that phone call from Madeline. To this day, I'm not sure what her motivation was. Did she genuinely want to help me? Or was there a part of her that enjoyed stirring up old connections? Whatever her reasons, I'm grateful she called. Without her, I might still be in the dark, living in a lie. Strangely enough, I've reconnected with Madeline since all of this went down. After the dust settled, I reached out to thank her for what she did. It wasn't an easy conversation. There's a lot of history between us, but it felt good to clear the air. One thing led to another, and we started spending more time together. I wouldn't call it a relationship yet, but it's something. Part of me wonders if it's too soon or if I'm just trying to fill the void Hannah left behind. What I do know is that this whole experience has taught me a lot about myself. I've learned to trust my instincts, to value my own worth, and to recognize that sometimes walking away is the best thing you can do. Staying in a relationship where you're not valued isn't love, it's self-destruction. I've also learned that healing isn't linear. Some days I feel strong and optimistic about the future. Other days I'm angry, hurt, and questioning everything. But that's okay. Growth takes time, and I'm giving myself the space to figure it all out. Hannah, for what it's worth, tried reaching out a few times after the divorce. I didn't answer. There's nothing left to say. She made her choices and I've made mine. I wish her the best, but I have no interest in revisiting that chapter of my life. Now I'm focused on moving. Whether or not things with Madeleine work out, I'm determined to build a life that makes me happy. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own story, and that's a feeling I'll never take for granted again. Starting over after a divorce is strange. Some days it feels like a clean slate, a fresh start. Other days it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or step back. That's where I've been lately, teetering between excitement for the future and lingering fear of repeating the past. My relationship with Madeleine has been complicated. Reconnecting with her after all these years has brought up old feelings, both good and bad. On one hand, there's a comfort in being with someone who knows me so well. On the other hand, I can't help but wonder if we're just trying to fill voids in each other's lives. Are we genuinely rebuilding something, or are we clinging to familiarity in the face of uncertainty? Madeleine has been patient, though. She's not pushing for anything serious, and I'm grateful for that. We're taking things one day at a time, and for now, that feels right. She's been a reminder that not every relationship is doomed to fail, a much needed reassurance as I try to figure out what comes next. One thing I've learned is that rebuilding your life isn't just about relationships. It's about rediscovering who you are and what makes you happy. I've started pursuing hobbies I'd neglected during my marriage, hiking, painting, even trying my hand at woodworking. These little projects have reminded me that I'm more than just someone's husband. I'm a whole person with my own interests, dreams, and goals. Work has been another anchor for me. Throwing myself into my career has given me structure and a sense of purpose. It's also kept me busy, which helps on the days when the loneliness creeps in. I'm even considering going back to school part-time to pursue a degree in project management, something I've always been curious about but never had the time for. Hannah is a distant memory now. I hear about her occasionally through mutual acquaintances, but I've made a conscious effort to cut ties completely. Whatever she's doing now, it's no longer my concern. Letting go of that connection has been liberating, even if it took a while to get there. As for the future, I'm optimistic. Whether or not things work out with Madeleine, I know I'm heading in the right direction. For the first time in a long time, I'm focusing on myself, my happiness, my growth, my goals, my peace. Not always easy, and there are still moments of doubt, but I've come to realize that starting over isn't something to fear. It's an opportunity to build a life you truly deserve. So here I am, standing at the edge of that cliff, not afraid anymore. The jump doesn't feel so daunting now. It feels like freedom. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.